Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's live stream where we're going to be talking about exercise selection. But I want to do something a little bit different, and I do want to share that if you have not watched me before or seen any of my streams in the past, I do want to share how you can access my website. So, of course, my website is bponlinefitness.com. This is what it'll look like when you look at it, and search it. There's a ton of information on here, as well as, sort of learning about online fitness coaching. When you go to program info, you can look at videos in my fitness blog that I upload to each and every day. I usually try to put any promotions that I have here on screen, and my latest live stream is usually posted here on the home screen as well. I explain a little bit about my services here. And then you can go here and book a consultation if you're interested. And if you want to learn more, of course, you can get in contact with me and you can subscribe to the newsletter that I send out each and every Monday. And of course, when you sign up to the email list, you'll also be sort of, opted into other sort of emails related to my business. So, or related to online fitness coaching. So definitely, check that out. So this is, again, I just wanted to show my website. If you're interested in joining and learning more about online coaching, you can click on this and it'll take you to a top form where it'll take you about 4 minutes, and it's a form that you'll complete, and I'll get it back in contact with you if you're interested in going into online coaching. So I decided to sort of share this to give you guys a more of a visual on how you can access my website. And again, it's bponlinefitness.com here on screen. And all the information you need is there. My social links are right here as well. So definitely check that out if you're interested. So, with all that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get going with today's topic, which is, of course, over exercise selection. So, in this topic, what we're primarily going to be talking about is basically why the exercises you choose in your workout routine can make a difference, and how you progress overall in your routine. So there's a few different points that I'm going to discuss as we're getting going into this topic. So the first, of course, the first slide I want to mention is going over some of the topics that we're sort of going to touch on as we go throughout this particular live stream. So of course, these are all the points we're going over. We're going to go over muscles don't know exercise names, they know tension, match the resistance curve to your muscle strength curve, primary function first versus secondary function second, lengthened versus shortened position loading, stability demands, change muscle output, eccentric control is a muscle's hidden job, and when exercises steal tension from the target muscle. So these are all of the different points that we're going to sort of be discussing today, and I'll try to get my head away from the screen as we go through these points. But again, the reason why I'm doing this sort of, more the full screen is to, of course, be more engaged with you guys as I'm going throughout these topics. So that's the reason why I've sort of made this shift to doing a full screen sort of presentation. So muscles, again, don't know exercise names, they know tension. So when it comes to our exercises, it's not necessarily about the exercises, as much. It's more about how we engage in those exercises that are going to make the difference. So, again, muscle growth doesn't happen because of fancy exercises, new programs, or perfectly named workout days. It happens because muscles experience mechanical tension for long enough in the right positions with enough control. So your body doesn't speak exercise, it speaks force, length, and load. So you have to keep in mind that, again, muscle growth happens when you have, this constant sort of tension that's being placed on the muscle, and not just focusing, specifically on, just an exercise itself. You have to think of each exercise as a way for you to sort of lead to muscle growth and to spend more time under tension in those exercises. And again, when we're talking about time under tension, what that means is that we're sort of bringing our muscles into a more lengthened position for a longer period of time. So, again, it's not solely on the exercises themselves, but how we control the weight as we're going throughout the workouts. So the next point, of course, is matching the resistance curve to the muscle's strength curve. So muscles aren't equally strong through the entire range of motion. Growth accelerates when resistance matches where the muscles can actually produce force. So in this point, what I want to mention is that when we're talking about, this difference in how our muscles are sort of reacting to what the kind of stimulus we put on them, what you have to keep in mind is that when you do an exercise like an incline sort of bicep curl, or if you're doing a regular bicep curl, you are going to notice that the way the muscle is engaged and the way that you sort of lift that weight is going to have different tension placed on it. For example, when you're doing an incline bicep curl, you're having to use a lot of, you're having to sort of work against gravity to perform the workout. Because the weights are kind of to your side and you're laying in an incline position, you have to really have more, sort of force being placed on that weight in order for you to lift it, correctly and to go through the proper form in the exercise. So, each exercise, you have to keep in mind that some exercises may be a little bit easier for you, but there's also going to be some that are going to require a little more attention and are going to be a little bit more challenging to sort of get a grasp of. And again, the way that you do that, of course, to improve in those exercises is by more repetition. Putting yourself into that workout more often is going to lead to you being able to have your muscles adapt to the exercise. So I want to move over to this side. So again, we talked about muscles aren't equally strong through the entire range of motion. So what does this mean exactly? So muscles are strongest in the mid range. So weaker at the end ranges, which is the fully stretched or shortened position. So like I mentioned many times, when we're focusing on our workouts, we do always want to have sort of a brief pause in between our lifting and our lowering phase. And again, what that does is that places more tension on that muscle for an extended period of time. So if resistance peaks where the muscle is weak, that tension is going to drop. If resistance peak where the muscle is strong, growth signal is going to increase. So when you think of workouts, you need to think about, of course, really spending that time under tension in the workout. Putting your muscles in more tension are really going to help it to, strengthen over time and to grow over time. And like I've mentioned many times before, you do have to keep in mind that when we're talking about exercise itself, this is only one, puzzle piece out of the entire puzzle. So it's not only how we approach exercises that is going to lead to results, it's also going to, play into the part of how do we approach nutrition and how do we approach our recovery. So the next point I want to go over, of course, is primary function first and secondary function second. So ask, what is the muscle's main action in the movement? So is it a prime mover or is it a stabilizer muscle? So before I continue on here and, discussing these next points, I want to mention exactly what a prime mover and a stabilizer is. So your prime mover muscle is the muscle that is, of course, being engaged most to, really perform the workout. So, for example, when we think of a sort of prime mover muscle in an example of an exercise, what that muscle would be is like if we're doing a bicep curl, our prime mover is, primarily, of course, going to be the biceps because that's what we're, focusing on targeting. So if we're sort of thinking of a stabilizer muscle, that is the muscle that is helping to assist that main prime mover muscle to perform the exercise. So, like when we're thinking about compound lifts, again, compound lifts are, you know, workouts that require multiple muscles to be engaged at once to perform the workout. And a lot of times these are, sort of lower body based workouts most of the time. The legs do require a lot of, you know, basically a lot of movement and require a lot of muscles to be engaged together in order to perform the workout. So in the stabilizers, a lot of the different muscles are going to be, sort of muscles that are going to assist those main muscles. So when we're thinking about like a barbell back squat, of course, the primary muscles that are being engaged or the prime mover are your quads, your hamstrings, and your glutes, but you also have those supporting muscles that are together, in lower body movements where, your adductors may be, sort of engaged at the same time, assisting those prime mover muscles to be able to perform the workout and to perform the movement. So choose the movement that loads the target through the best range of motion. So prioritize tension, repeatable technique, and progression. So again, our exercise choices do matter in a lot of ways, and we're going to discuss a little bit about progression and how, we can move forward in choosing the exercises that work best. But what you have to think about most is prioritizing more attention on the muscle as much as possible. So that tension is again what's placing the pressure on the muscle and is really, leading it to, of course, when we're in that recovery process, because our muscles go through tears, that tension is, of course, tearing the muscle, but it's also helping, of course, to, build it back as we're having a proper recovery process. So focus on tension, repeatable technique, get adjusted to the workout, and then at the same time, as you're getting adjusted through that workout, think about how you can progress, how you can add a little bit more challenge because you don't want to stay in a, workout routine for too long. Of course, you do want to stay in that routine and that set of workouts until you've really mastered form and technique, but you also want to continue to think about progression as you are sort of mastering those workouts. So, another thing you have to ask is what else does this exercise train that matters? So when we're looking at workouts, we have to think about how those muscles are being engaged and why that matters the most. So stability, of course, demands core, hips, and foot. So that tripod, you know, sort of, support in workouts. Position demands upright versus hinge and angle. Resistance curve and stretch buys, and joint tolerance is more of your knees, your hips, and back friendly based exercises. So there's a ton of different exercises that you can choose for a wide variety of reasons and for a wide variety of, goals in mind on, how you're wanting to sort of approach your workouts and what you're going after. Again, like I've mentioned, in the past in other streams, when we think of our exercises, you have to think of it in the context of your goals and you have to make sure that you choose exercises that are going to align best with your goals. So, like, when we're talking about, hypertrophy and we're talking about muscle gain, we're talking a lot about strength training, weightlifting based exercises that use a lot of different modalities like dumbbells, barbells, and things of that nature. But when we're talking about fat loss, the big difference is that what we're talking about is not necessarily about, the weightlifting itself or the strength training. We're basically having more of a mix between the two. Fat loss can still be beneficial, or with weightlifting itself. Weightlifting can still be a great combination. But what we also have to think about is that how we sort of approach, our exercises and, you know, is going to make a difference. So you have to combine a little bit more cardio along with weightlifting to have more balance. So yes, when we're thinking of muscle gain, we still would include cardio, but we're more balancing things out a little bit more when we're focused on fat loss because we're not, gearing our goal towards hypertrophy in particular. And with performance based goals, that change and shifts a little bit more. So we may focus on, adding, a good amount of cardio alongside a good amount of, really power based movements and more agility movements. Not so much weightlifting, but more of, really rapid movements, hit training, and things of that nature. So here's an example here of primary function. So the quads, of course, are engaging in basically these two different movements. So you've got your knee extension and your squat pattern. Hamstrings are, of course, engaging with the hip hinge as well as knee flexion. The glutes are hip extension and abduction, depending on the goal. So an example, of course, for secondary would be split squat, quads, glutes, plus that hip stability. RDL, of course, is your Romanian deadlift. That is your hamstrings and your glutes, as well as trunk bracing that is being involved in those sort of exercises. And then when we're thinking of step ups, your glutes, quads, and altogether balance and control is a big, sort of component. So what you're seeing between these two different sort of movements and these two different, primary functions or two different functions themselves is that with the primary function, we're focusing on more of the movement pattern. Whereas with secondary function, we're focusing on, of course, engaging those muscles, but we may be focusing on an additional component like hip stability, having more trunk control, focusing on more balance, stability, and control. So we're basically combining those two elements together. And you want to focus, of course, on your primary function first before you start to move into the secondary, which is a little bit more advanced because we're thinking about, really, honing in on a particular, movement and honing in on a particular type of method that we're trying to improve on, like hip stability and having more balance and control. So stability demands change muscle output. So your body has a limited effort budget. So if more effort goes to balancing, bracing, and coordination, less is available for driving the target muscle close to failure. So with chest, and this is sort of giving you, a little bit of an idea on how that progression is working, is that with the push-ups, you're going to have unstable sort of movement. You're going to move to dumbbell press, which is going to add a little bit more, moderate engagement. And then with barbell and Smith machine, you're going to have more of a stable movement. And then with the machine press, it's going to be the most stable. So this is sort of giving you an example on sort of the different, differences in stability as we're going throughout specific workouts. Push-ups are going to be more unstable. Dumbbell press is going to have moderate stability. Barbell and Smith machine are going to be more stable in themselves. And then the machine press, of course, with strength training machines, you're going to have the most stability because you're going to be locked into place in that machine. So you have to think about that as well. So to give you an example of, sort of leg squat pattern and an example of how that stability sort of changes with the workouts is that with a free squat, you're going to have sort of a moderate amount of stability. Front squats are going to be moderate to high. Your Smith machine squat is going to be more stable, of course, because you're tied to that machine. And then your hack squat and leg press is going to be, of course, the most stable because you're going to be, again, in a more confined machine. So this is just giving you an example of where stability changes sort of add up over time. So the next point I want to go over, of course, I probably should stay over here, is eccentric control is a muscle's hidden job. So if you see me, go into different videos where I've discussed eccentric movement, what eccentric movement really is sort of that lowering phase in your workout. So when you focus on more eccentric control, it's really going to help to develop more muscle growth because you're spending more time and attention in that exercise. So again, better eccentric control is more time and attention without adding extra sets to your workouts. So that more tension in the lengthened position is really going to lead to more muscle growth. So it's going to lead to less leakage in joints, bounce, and momentum. So you're not going to rely so much on momentum when you're focusing on how you spend time in that eccentric phase or the lowering phase of the workout. Your reps are going to be much cleaner. And again, this is going to make you think about that mind muscle connection. You're going to intentionally think about your form and technique when you're having to slow your reps down. So it's going to lead you closer to that failure more safely because you're having more control of that weight. More consistent progression week to week. So when you focus on more eccentric control in your workouts, that progression is going to be more consistent as you move forward. So when exercise is still tension from the target muscle. So have you ever finished a set and thought, that was supposed to hit my glutes? Why did I feel my low back? This row is for my lats, but my biceps are on fire first, and my quads never light up. My knees just get annoyed. So that's not you being bad at training. That's something I call a tension thief or theft. So tension theft happens when an exercise should load a target muscle, but the tension gets redirected into different areas, usually your joints or momentum, or stronger helper muscles, long before the target reaches a productive level of fatigue. So when you're performing an exercise, and I sort of touched on this not too long ago, when you perform exercises, what you have to think about, as you're going through the form and the technique, is you need to think about where the tension in that muscle is going. If that tension is targeting that specific muscle that you're wanting to target, then you're doing the exercise as it needs to be. But if there's tension being shifted into another muscle when you're actually focusing on targeting, a different muscle, then you have to think about how your form and technique is. You have to sort of see, okay, what am I doing wrong? And I think this is the factor that is really important where you think about, maybe using a mirror or, recording with your phone to see your form and technique so that you're better able to sort of identify where your tension is being led to. So you got to think about that as well. So just pay attention as you're performing workouts on if that tension is in the correct muscle that you're trying to target or if it's being shifted away into another muscle. And so, again, the way that you identify that is, of course, when you feel that tension in the muscle after you get done with the set of workouts. And the way that you shift that, of course, is making minor changes to your technique. There's different things that can change sort of where that tension is being engaged. Sometimes it can be your grip in the workout. It could be even a minor shift in how your, maybe your legs are positioned or your arms are positioned, sort of leading to that shift in tension on, or from the target muscle. All right. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. I really thank you for your time and your attention for all of what I've discussed here today on exercise selection. So again, this is a topic for pretty much anybody. I went over a little bit about how progression is, how we go from more stable or more unstable workouts to more stable workouts, and vice versa. So, and I also, of course, discussed a little bit about exercise selection, your primary sort of, function-based movements versus your secondary function-based movements, where our primary, we're focusing on really engaging those large muscles, and then the secondary is more honing in on specific things that we are trying to, very much improve and sort of oscillate more on those muscles. So again, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I do have my email here on screen, and my phone is, of course, on the right side here. And again, my website is bponlinefitness.com, as I showed at the beginning of this stream. Definitely check that out. I'll always keep that information updated on there as much as possible. I am again offering 20% off online fitness coaching at least through the end of January for New Year's. So if there's something that you're interested in, all you have to do is click on the button to join the team and you will be able to complete the sort of consultation form and I will get in contact with you for us to schedule a free consultation call if that's something that you're interested in. So again, guys, I really appreciate your time. I hope that you found this helpful and valuable. And I hope that this gave you a little bit more insight on how you can sort of choose the right exercises that'll work for you in your workout routine. So, with all that being said, guys, I'll have another stream next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. But I really appreciate your time and I hope that you found this helpful and valuable. If you have any questions, let me know. But thank you guys once again for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. So, thank you guys once again.